Hello everyone, and welcome to my presentation. My name is David Townsend. I'm originally from Canada, but for the last 20 years I've been living and working in Japan, where I'm an associate professor in the English department of Shujitsu University. Today I'm going to be talking about a study that I conducted to try to determine how my students feel about assessing their classmates' oral presentations, as well as being assessed themselves. I've been teaching presentation skills for a number of years now. Originally, I began teaching presentations to company workers who were preparing to do presentations on overseas trips. When I changed to university, however, the dynamics were much different and the classes were much larger. And one of the problems I soon encountered was when it was time to assess the students, student after student would come to the front of the class to give their presentation while the other students did virtually nothing. And I did not feel this was the most productive usage of time. So me and some of my colleagues decided to look at ways that we could change this, and what we came up with was peer assessment. And one of the things that we had the students do, along with the teacher, the students would also assess their classmates as they gave their presentations. They would look at voice. Was the pace and volume good? They would assess the student's posture. They would assess gestures, both body gestures as well as voice. And they would also assess if the language was accessible. Was the language that they used, was it prepared well? Was it easily accessible for all the other students, as well as some other things. And we decided that the student scores, the aggregate of the student scores would be 30% and the teacher score would be 70%. And we thought that this was a good compromise. But one of the things that I was a little bit worried about was, would the students' assessments be reliable? And so I decided to do some research and conduct some studies on the rate of reliability of the student-generated scores. Once again, 30% of the score from the students would go towards the overall grade that the students received. I was very concerned that these would not be reliable, and I conducted some studies, and as a result I found that the students' generated scores were actually relatively reliable, meaning when multiple students watched one presenter, the scores weren't too different. Now this greatly depended, of course, on radio training. So I also conducted some studies on what type of training and how much training was best to make the student scores as reliable as possible. As well, I really wanted the students to give good feedback in the form of comments. This would help the students to understand what aspect of their presentations were very good, as well as what aspects of their presentations they might want to improve on in the future to make their presentations even better. And then this brought me to the current study. After all of this time, I never asked the students, how do you feel? Do you enjoy peer assessment? Do you enjoy assessing other students? Do you enjoy being assessed? But more importantly, of course, do they feel it's useful? Do the comments that they get from their students help them to make their presentations better in the future? And watching the other students and assessing the discrete skills, does that make them understand how important they are to a good presentation? If a student after student is reading from their paper and not looking at the audience, not engaging, can they understand why this might be important for them? Now I'll briefly give an overview of the study group. This study was conducted at a private Japanese university. All of the students involved were second-year English majors. In the first semester, there were 19 students, and in the second semester, there were 17. The contents of this class centered around discussion skills and presentation skills. However, the study only looked exclusively at the presentation component of this class. And the class met twice a week for 90 minutes each time. So in the first semester, there were 32 classes, and in the second semester, again, 32 classes. So for 1 year, there was about 64 classes. I should reiterate one more time, however, that this study looked exclusively at the presentation component of this class only. Qualitative data was obtained through the use of a survey adapted from Fazel, and he originally used it to conduct research on his EFL students in Iran. The survey is comprised of 10 statements that the respondents rank using a 5-point Likert scale, ranging from strongly agree to strongly disagree. As well, qualitative data was also gathered through written remarks obtained using an optional comment section at the end of the survey. The original survey was translated into Japanese. This was done so that the students could comprehend and answer the survey questions as accurately as possible. Furthermore, when providing comments, students were permitted to do so in either Japanese or English. This data was then analyzed to determine the perceived benefits and weaknesses of peer assessment within the context of oral presentations in a Japanese university EFL classroom. The 10 statements that the respondents were asked to rank can be separated into 4 broad categories based on the type of information they are meant to solicit. Items 1, 3, 5, and 10 look at the effects of peer assessment on learning, motivation, and participation. Does peer assessment in the classroom motivate the students to learn more? Does the assessments that the students receive from their classmates, does that help them? Do they feel that it improves the learning in the classroom, etc., etc.? Item 2 examines the students' understanding of the requirements of the course. Does this activity help them to understand what they are supposed to be doing in the class? Does it help them understand what the teacher wants them to do through this activity? Items 4 and 6 explore the effects of peer assessment on class interactions. Number 4 looks at teacher-student interactions. Do they feel that this improves the interactions between the teacher and the student? And number 6 looks at the interaction among students. Does peer assessment improve or to help, or do they perceive it as being good for student interaction? And finally, items 7, 8, and 9 probe the students' attitude towards assessing their peers. Do they feel that they have the ability to assess their peers? As well, do they feel that the assessments that their peers give them, their classmates give them, are they fair? Do they perceive them as being fair, and do they perceive them as being useful? All right, now the survey was administered twice, once after semester 1 and again at the end of semester 2 after 1 full year of experiencing and using peer assessment in this classroom. This slide details the results from the administration of the first survey at the end of semester 1, and I'll now go over some of the major findings from this survey. Item 1, peer assessment is helpful to students' learning. 94.7% of students either strongly agreed or somewhat agreed, and they perceived peer assessment to be a valuable activity in the classroom, having the potential to improve the effectiveness and quality of learning. Item 3, motivation. Peer assessment activities motivate students to learn. A total of 73.7% indicated that peer assessment inspired their motivation to learn, 15.8% strongly and 57.9% somewhat. This was the second lowest percent of agreement of the 10 items surveyed. As well, of all the items, it was the only one that received any negative reactions, with 5.3% of respondents somewhat disagreeing with this item. At least for a few students in the class, peer assessment was not considered highly motivating. All right, moving on to item 10. This was looking at did they want to engage in peer assessment in the future, in perhaps other classes? Did they think it might be valuable to them? And this was 89.5% favorability. And with item number 7, they enjoyed the highest strongly agree rating at 31.6%. Items 4 and 6 are used to elicit the perceived effect that peer assessment had on the students' interactions with the teacher and, of course, among themselves. And item 4, peer assessment activities increase the interaction between the teacher and the students, had the lowest overall aggregate favorability of all the items at 68.4%. 26.3 strongly agree and 42.1 somewhat agree. Item 6, peer assessment activities increase the interaction among students, fared slightly better, with a combined favorability agreement of 79%, 26 strongly agreeing and 52.7 somewhat agreeing. Items 7 and 8 attempted to ascertain whether or not the students perceived the assessments their peers gave them to be fair. Item 7, I think students are eligible to assess their classmates' performance. And item 8, the scores and comments my peers gave me were fair and reasonable. Both received perfect 100% aggregate agreement. Item 8 received the second highest strongly agree rating at 26.3%. This indicates the students were happy with the assessments and comments provided by their peers, perceiving them as fair and reasonable. Once again, this suggests that the rater comments training was adequate. Finally, looking at item 9, assessing other students' presentations helped me plan and deliver my own presentation, did not enjoy the same level of agreement. Only 10.5% of students strongly agreed, while 68.4% somewhat agreed. Now, while the overall agreement level of 78.9% is certainly not bad, the number of students who strongly agreed with item 9 was by far the lowest at 2. All right, we've looked at the results from the first administration of the survey. We looked at some specific important points, but now we're going to look at it in general. As I mentioned before, strongly and agree, somewhat agree was 86.31%. This was a very favorable finding that the students feel that it's useful for them. However, somewhat agree and undecided was also very large at 76.52%. And these results suggest to me that the students have not formed very strong opinions, but their opinions on peer assessment are still a little tenuous. And I'm hoping that after one more semester, after a full year, that their opinions would become stronger and the undecided would become less. And here are the comments that the students left in the first semester survey. As I mentioned, it was optional, and 9 of 19 students chose to leave a comment. I think probably the most important point was that one student appreciated the varied feedback from not only the teacher but other students. They certainly could understand the purpose behind this very important peer assessment activity. Now let's look at the second semester survey results. Once again, this survey was given at the end of the second semester. That was after 64 classes. And I'm not going to go over all of the items distinctly. However, I would like to give a broad overview look at this. Now, in the first semester, it was 86.3% agreement. In the second semester, this went up slightly to 87.7%. But the most important finding was that the undecided dropped almost half, from 13.16% to 8.85%. And this leads me to believe that after, of course, one full year practicing peer assessment, becoming more understanding of how it was used, that they could get a more stronger opinion, and they could understand how they felt more deeply. And this obviously these was dispersed. However, it went more to somewhat disagree, which was a little bit unfortunate. Some of the students decided that after 1 year that they a little bit didn't agree as much with peer assessment. However, I should reiterate, it did go up slightly, the rate of agreement. The most important point of change was point number 9. Assessing other students' presentations helped me plan and deliver my own presentations. Unfortunately, students became to feel that this wasn't as much useful as they originally thought, and it became 11.8% somewhat disagree. Now we'll look at the comments from the second semester. This time, 8 of 17 students chose to leave a comment. And I think the most important point is that the number of students that thought that peer assessment helped them to become better presenters went from 1 from the first semester to 3 in the second semester. So I was very happy with this, that the students could understand the benefits of peer assessment, at least from the comments. Here are the references from my presentation. I just would like to make some final comments. As this survey indicated, the students had a very strong favorability towards peer assessment. They could understand how it benefits them. Not surprisingly, the results indicate that after more exposure, that their opinions became stronger. I do think that this certainly deserves more research and more study in the future, which I'd like to continue doing. I just want to say thank you very much, everybody, for checking out my presentation. I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you have. And of course, I left my email in the introduction. I'd be very happy to hear from any of you about this presentation in the future, and to hear your comments, and maybe to continue a discussion on this very important topic. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. I really hope next year we can meet face to face and we can have some very productive conference live. Thank you very much.